welcome back. We are joined on the sofa now by Gordon Scruton. Good morning, Gordon.
Hi, Sarah.
Gordon is our very own ICJS Learning Development Tutor, which is fantastic because not all departments have a Gordon. So Gordon is responsible.
No other departments have a Gordon.
Gordon looks after all of our students across campus and distance learning.
Campus, distance learning, level, first years up to doctorate.
Fantastic. Yeah. And your role is all about supporting students in producing better work, I suppose.
Yeah, it's the academic skills. It's the stuff that's not specific to the subject. So
Yes.
I'm not a criminologist. And I'm not somebody who's involved in the risk and security management, that sort of thing. But that's kind of why I was put in here, was because really the stuff that you should be writing is stuff that should be understandable to somebody who is, educated but not in that particular field.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Brilliant. So Gordon and I have had a little chat about what makes a better essay.
Well, I had a number of chats over the years about this, yeah.
And we've come up with this, no expense spared, prop here on our sofa of the things that might be a good idea to consider when writing better essays.
We're big fans of Blue Peter.
Yeah, we're going to go through, no, it gets better, it's got Velcro.
Oh, wow.
We're going to go through some of these. Now the first one is to use more and better evidence. Should we have a chat about that one?
Yes. So the more and better evidence often comes from the problem that the students have, is that they've done quite a bit of reading potentially, but they don't necessarily acknowledge it in their writing. And so sometimes when a student gets this sort of feedback, I can understand where they're coming from, but they feel it's a bit unfair because I did all this reading. Like, yes, but are there citations showing where that you've used this stuff? No. So sometimes that's purely a factor of them not having employed the citations correctly. Sometimes it is a fact that they maybe, one thing maybe didn't consult the reading lists, which is a big no-no, by the way, because these guys put a lot of time and effort into putting the reading lists together. And if you ignore the reading lists, you're kind of annoying the person who's going to be marking your work. But they either avoid the reading list or they stick religiously to the reading list and don't bother doing any additional reading. And all of those things are, we want a balance. We want you to use the reading list as kind of a skeleton structure, and then we want you to go and find better evidence.
Yeah.
Now, the better evidence, I want to ask you about
Yeah.
that. What would you define as being the better
Well,
evidence?
I would say a range, because I've recently come out of my little marking hovel where I put myself for 3 days, and what I was writing a lot on the feedback to these essays is that your reference list as a student looks quite impressive, but it's all newspaper reports. Or this was for a module on criminal justice, or there was just a lot of organisational reports with no consideration of the academic literature. So when we think about better evidence, I would say it's using a range of relevant evidence. So newspaper reports are okay, but not to base your entire essay on. Looking at police statistics, for example, you wouldn't base your whole essay on that, or organisational reports, because they can be, a little bit biased sometimes. Academic literature, great. Really have a look at some of that in depth. So it's about using that range of literature and not just focusing on one specific thing.
Is there sort of a hierarchy you talk about in terms of academic literature?
I would say that journal articles are your creme de la creme, really, in terms of what you should be looking at, because they are looked at by other academics in the field. They are judged and assessed. Whereas a newspaper report, might be very informative and written in a nice way, but they've looked at data elsewhere. They may have a particular line that they want to sell. So, yes, do embrace journal articles, I would say to students. Yeah,
because I think the journal articles, they are the ones that are, I think the textbooks are key for getting your fundamentals, and they discuss kind of the theory and the established stuff. And the journal articles really take that information and run with it and test it and push it, pushing out the envelope, pushing out however you want to call it. So, if you wanted to get an idea about sort of the classical theory of criminology, what have you, I wouldn't go to a journal article. I'd go to the textbook. But for how that is being applied at the moment, I'd be going to the journal articles. So I think that's kind
it's
of
the balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with textbooks at all.
No, not
and
at
they're
all.
great. I mean, for
Yeah.
our level 4 students, relying on textbooks is absolutely fine. But textbooks are great to give you, as you say, that broad overall picture of what the topic's about. And then you can think, actually, that bit that's mentioned, and it's probably only briefly in a couple of sentences, is really important. I'll look at that in more depth in journal articles.
Yeah,
And you can,
absolutely.
you can probably find then 20, 30 journal articles just on that tiny little bit that was only mentioned in a sentence. In
I'd
your
also
textbook.
say for the level 5s and level 6s, if you're feeling a little bit unsure, like you want a bit of brushing up and a quick sort of, I vaguely remember that a couple of years ago, but I've forgotten what the details are. Just jump
Start
into a
with
textbook. Yeah, and go back into
Absolutely.
the textbook.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily need to use that in your references, but just kind of going back to give yourself a bit of a refresher.
Yeah, just a reminder of the story, really.
We should probably move on, actually.
Yeah, and the next one is that students should provide a clear introduction and essay structure.
Yes. So there's basically two things that an introduction needs to do, as far as I'm concerned. One is to give a broad outline of what the essay is, what the topic of the essay is. You guys have an awful lot of marking to do, and a lot of different assignments coming in at the same time. I wouldn't be too surprised if you open up an assignment and you don't necessarily immediately know which question that's referring to, and really as a reader you want one or two initial sentences to just locate the reader, you, as to what we're talking about. Are we talking about prisons? Are we talking about criminal justice reform? Are we talking about the sort of piracy in the Indian Ocean, that sort of thing? So that's the first thing that needs to happen. The second thing that needs to happen is what I kind of jokingly referred to as the train announcement, but it's basically the outline of the structure. Now here's the key thing. I don't think you can actually write your introduction until you get pretty close to the end of your writing.
Definitely.
You can't. We've got this idea from schools when we were all writing in pen, and I think they still do it now, where when you're in the exam, what have you, you've got to write, and so you've got to start writing at the beginning.
Yes.
And so you have to write the introduction first. We've got it into our head that that's how we have to write. But my point always is you can't usually introduce something if you don't have a thing to introduce first. So I tend to tell students to kind of leave the introduction to the end. If you want to write an introduction to help you give an idea about what you're going to say, fine, but that's always got kind of brackets around it. It's always going to be a bit of a placeholder. And in terms of essay structure, students have a bit of a problem insofar as they will write, and the way it comes out of them is the way it stays. And that's kind of like taking this jigsaw puzzle, which I happen to bring with me today. Actually, Sarah brought it with her. But it's kind of like the writing the first draft, getting the first idea down, is like putting all these pieces onto the table, taking them out of the box. But then you've got these completed pieces of writing, and then you've got to kind of fit them together.
Yeah.
You've got to put them together so that the bigger picture is going to be clear to you, the reader.
Yes.
And that takes more time. The editing and the redrafting is not something actually which I think is given enough time. I kind of cringe when students. I understand, the distance learners, have lives they've got to kind of be managing as well. But I do kind of cringe when the student says, "Oh, I'm just about done. All I've got to do is the writing. It's got to be in 2 days, but all I've got to do is write it." That makes me cry inside a little bit. But what's your take on
So I suppose it's having all of the information, but then it's producing it in a coherent fashion,
Yeah.
isn't it? And that's really important. But I think your point about writing the introduction afterwards is absolutely key, and I do that with my writing still now, because I know vaguely what's coming next, but I don't know in what order, and I don't know what's going to be the most important thing that I'm going to be talking about later on. So absolutely introduce the topic, and I like that, the way that you talk about that when you say, that your marker's got lots to read. They don't know particularly what topic you're talking about. So introduce the general area in a nice, gentle way. Relate it to some current affairs if it's relevant.
Absolutely.
If there's something going on with stop and search, for example, in policing, relate it to an incident that might have happened recently. And then the reader thinks, I see what topic we're talking about. And then bang, tell them how the train announcement, perfect. Tell them how you're going to structure it, and that's really important because it makes your reader feel at ease. Oh, okay, this is about this, and this is what they're going to tell me. Right, I can sit back and relax and enjoy the ride.
Yeah. It's not a thriller. We don't want twists and turns. We don't want unexpected occurrences and
we want a nice
wasn't expecting
steady
this.
ride.
No, it's a very, very different genre of writing.
Brilliant, thank you, Gordon. I think that's very helpful. Next up, reference fully within the essay.
So the referencing fully thing, one of the biggest issues is that students kind of don't. It takes a bit of time to get used to this, but you've got to get the idea that the references are specific to the sentence that they are in. The citations are specific to the sentence they are in. So one of the problems I see is that like a student will say put the citation at the end of the paragraph, and in their mind it applies to the entire paragraph. It doesn't. It applies to that final sentence, and so you're going to put down things like in the 2 or 3 sentences above that final sentence, you're going to put unsupported, where's your evidence? Unsupported, where's your evidence? Unsupported, where's your evidence? So there is that.
So the reference needs to come after the point where you first mention that particular piece of research that you're looking
within
at.
that sentence, yes. And then then what you've got to do, you've got to make sure that you have got every time there's another sentence that's coming up that's using information from that source, you've still got to acknowledge where that information is coming from.
Absolutely.
The only time when you don't really need to do that would be in the conclusion, because you're not introducing any new information, you're only referring back to stuff that was in the main body. So you wouldn't need to do, I would generally tell students you don't need to put citations, you shouldn't be putting citations into the conclusion, because that would indicate you're still introducing new information, which you shouldn't be doing anyway.
And that point really relates as well to this point, I think, because if students are only putting a reference at the end of the paragraph, you're assuming then that they're only using one source for that entire paragraph, whereas if you are using more and better evidence, you would hope to be basing your point that you're making on 2 or 3 sources.
Well, this is one of the big things, one of the big problems that I see in quite a few pieces of work is that the students kind of tend to structure their work based on where they got the information from, not based on what the information is telling them.
This is so important.
There's a Smith paragraph, there's a Jones paragraph, there's a McLaughlin paragraph, but they might be saying similar things, they might be saying the same thing, they might be saying things that actually contradict each other and need to be discussed together in terms of discussing that point, that topic. So that there's quite a lot of that where that kind of sets off alarm bells when students send work to me and I see the Smith paragraph or section, and then it moves on to the Jones section, and all they're doing is basically just reporting what somebody else has said.
And I can see why students do that, because they've got all of their evidence in front of them. I've got this book, this paper, this document. I'll start with this one, I'll summarise this, then I'll move on and summarise this. If you've made notes and done all your reading beforehand, what students should start to do is identify themes emerging. Ah, yes, this is an important theme. Discrimination, for example, is an important theme. And that piece of work, and that piece of work, and that piece of work all talk about discrimination. So I'll have a paragraph on discrimination, and I'll refer to those 3 things. And that's why planning your essay is crucial.
I think that's exactly kind of, let's go back to the sort of jigsaw piece, where the first draft of a piece of writing that a student might do probably would be structured very much as a Smith, a Jones, a McLaughlin paragraph. But then you've got to figure out where are the connections here, and where can it be maybe moved around to make more sense for the reader. The first draft is for you, the writer. The second draft is for your audience. And I mean, I can't quite remember. This might be something we're about to come on to.
I may have changed.
The idea of audience is something that writers in general often forget.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll hold my hand up, and I'm guilty of that. But you've got to keep in mind: are you writing to try and get all the ideas down that you know, or are you writing to answer a question that somebody else is going to read?
Yeah, brilliant. That's really important information there about how to structure your essay, I think. And that's why sometimes it's important to go from your sources to notes to your essay.
Yes.
Because if you miss out the notes stage, then you can get into trouble with the
list.
With,
which I think are about to come up.
Next up. This isn't easy, and this comes with time, so students should panic if they're not doing this straight away.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is something which is great in first year if we can do it, is kind of encouraged in second year and is required definitely in final year. but the students who are getting the higher marks in first year are the ones who are already kind of doing this.
So how do you do it?
Well, I tend to tell students, I work from the basis of you've done a general first draft, you've made your notes, you've written up relatively full paragraphs, and then you would go through with a very simple two-color code. You would say that every sentence is either going to be descriptive or it is going to be analytical. The descriptive stuff is the stuff that's cited, it's the stuff that's statistics, it's facts and figures, those sorts of things.
But it's what those mean.
It's what those mean.
That's analysis, isn't it? Yeah.
And so it's the so what.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very much the so what. So what I tend to get students to do is that they will go through sentence by sentence and they'll say yellow and green, and for description they highlight if they see that the sentence is descriptive, they highlight it yellow. If they see the sentence is discursive, if it's analytical, it's starting to answer that so what about this question, if it's linking it back to the overall question, then highlight it green. And very quickly you get a pretty good visual feedback saying, oh wow, I've got 2 paragraphs here that are all yellow. There's nothing analytical here at all.
Yeah.
And that's great. That just means, right, you've just got to go back to those paragraphs and think about
why it matters.
What's the so
Yeah.
what? Where's
And
the
I
link
suppose
back to the question?
what we were talking about earlier with the sort of discrimination idea,
Yeah.
if you were writing about that, for example, rather than having your paragraph on so-and-so said this, so-and-so said that, so-and-so said that, which is description,
Yes.
if you analyse it around theme,
Yeah.
then it's more about, well, these people think this is important and why
Yeah.
they think it's important.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
absolutely.
But, as we say, it's really important that students don't panic about this.
No,
This
no.
comes with experience,
It
doesn't
does.
it?
It does absolutely.
And it doesn't-
It's not going to be a 50-50 balance.
No.
So,
Because you've got to be telling the story at the
You do,
beginning. You've got to
yeah.
set out the scene
Yeah.
and what the nature of the problem is to start
Because if
with.
you don't back it up with the evidence, if you don't have the necessary description, then it becomes assumptions.
Yeah,
So,
we don't want those.
yeah.
And finally, this is my favourite one.
Right, yes, the signposting with this. What is the problem, Sarah, when an assignment is not signposted?
I'm going back to your analogy now with the train announcement,
Okay.
because when you're on the train, they're telling you what
Yeah.
station you're coming up to next and how long you're going to be at the station and when your anticipated final destination is going to be and all the rest of it. If I'm reading an essay and I'm not clear where we're going or why we're going,
Yeah.
then it makes me unsettled.
Yes.
I want to know why you've told me, what you've just told me, I want to know why it's important,
Yeah.
but I want to know why it relates to the question.
Mhm.
So go back to the question again and make it quite explicit.
Yes.
This point clearly demonstrates that the question is blah, 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 blah,
I
blah.
know a few students have told me that they don't like doing that, first of all, because it seems a bit basic in terms of the writing.
Ooh,
It also
like it.
seems condescending. It's like, well, I'm writing for these experts. They obviously understand where I'm coming from, and I have to kind of point out, well, no, it's clear in your head because it's been in your head for a few
Yeah.
weeks while you've been working on this, but it's not.
But
necessarily clear.
you're writing for, I always suggest to students, you're writing for an intelligent-ish
Yeah.
teenager. You're not writing for your professor of whatever.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
keep it simple, because
Yeah.
yes, you can have difficult concepts within it, and you can produce challenging arguments, but unless your reader knows why that's important
Yeah.
for the question, so signpost all the way through. As
So,
we
yeah.
discussed earlier in the
Yeah.
essay, as we shall see later in the essay,
Yeah.
keep saying, it's like the train thing,
I
keep
think
saying where it's going.
the last thing I would say was that with the signposting, what's really important is that the beginning of a paragraph, which is, I would say, the beginning of a point, beginning of a paragraph is really has to acknowledge to the reader there's a change of topic.
Yes.
And explain what the connection is to what's just happened and where you're about to go. The end of the paragraph, I don't try to get students to link forward. I try to get them to link back. So when they get to the end of a paragraph, the end of a point they're making, link it back to the question. Explain very explicitly how everything that's just been read in this paragraph, how does that link back to the question?
Yeah.
So linking forward at the beginning, I'd say linking backwards at the end of a paragraph, and I think that works quite well.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you ever so much, Gordon. I think there's some really good advice there, and not just for our students, for anyone that's writing
Yeah.
in any field. I think there's some really good
Hopefully.
stuff there, hopefully.
There's more information on my Moodle page.
Yes, brilliant, and we'll put the link for that up later. Thank you very much indeed.